I'm happy to join with you today in what will go down in history as the greatest demonstration for freedom in the history of our nation. 50 years ago, a great American in whose symbolic shadow we stand today signed the Emancipation Proclamation. This momentous decree came as a great beacon light of hope to the millions of Negro slaves who had been seared by the flames of withering injustice. It came as a joyous daybreak to end the long night of their captivity. But 100 years later, the Negro is still not free. 100 years later, the life of the Negro is still sadly crippled by the manacles of segregation and the chains of discrimination. 100 years later, the Negro lives on a lonely island of poverty in the midst of a vast ocean of material prosperity. 100 years later, the Negro is languished in a corner of American society and finds himself in exile in his own land. So we've come here today to dramatize this shameful condition. In a sense, we've come to our nation's capital to cash a check. When the architects of our republic wrote the magnificent words of the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence, he was signing a promissory note to which all Americans were to fall here. This note was a promise that all men, yes, black men as well as white men, would be guaranteed the inalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It is obvious today that America has defaulted on this promissory note insofar as her people of color are concerned. Instead of honoring this sacred obligation, America has given the Negro people a bad check. A check that has come back marked insufficient funds. But we refuse to believe that there are insufficient funds in the great vaults of opportunity of this nation. So we've come to cash this check. A check that will give us upon demands the riches of freedom and the security of justice. We've also come to this hollow spot to remind America of the fierce urgency of now. This is no time to engage in the luxury of cooling off or taking the tranquilizing drug of gradualism. Now is the time to make real the promises of our democracy. Now is the time to rise from this dark and desolate valley of segregation to the sunlit path of racial justice. Now is the time to lift our nation from the quicksands of racial injustice to a solid rock of brotherhood. Now is the time to make justice a reality for all of God's children. It would be fatal for the nation to overlook the urgency of the moment. This summer of the Negro's legitimate discontent will not pass until there is an invigorating autumn of freedom and equality. 1963 is not an end, but a beginning. Those of you who hope that the Negro who needed to blow off steam and will now be content will have a rude awakening if they return to business as usual. There will be neither rest nor tranquility until the Negro has granted his citizenship rights. The whirlwind of revolt will continue to shake the foundations of this nation until that bright day of justice emerges. But there is something that I must say to my people who stand on the warring threshold that leads to the palace of justice. In the process of gaining our rightful place, we must not be guilty of wrongful deeds. Let us not seek to satisfy our thirst for freedom by drinking from the cup of bitterness and hatred. We must forever conduct our struggle on the high planes of dignity and discipline. Let us not allow our creative protest to degenerate into physical violence. Again and again, we must rise to the majestic heights of meeting physical force with soul force. The marvelous new militancy, which has engulfed our Negro communities, must not lead us to the distrust of all men, all white men. For many of our brothers, as evidence of their presence here today, have come to realize that their destiny is tied to our destiny. They've come to realize that their freedom is tied to our freedom. We cannot walk alone, and as we walk, we must make the pledge that we will always march ahead. There are those who are asking the devotees of civil rights, when will you be satisfied? We can never be satisfied as long as the Negro is the victim of the horrors of police brutality. We can never be satisfied as long as our bodies, heavy with the fatigue of travel, cannot gain lodge in the motels of highways and hotels of cities. We can never be satisfied as long as our children are stripped of their selfhood and robbed of their dignity by signs stating, "For whites only." We can never be satisfied as long as the Negro's basic mobility is from a smaller ghetto to a larger one. We can never be satisfied as long as the Negro in Mississippi cannot vote and the Negro in New York believes he has nothing for which to vote. No, we will not be satisfied. And we will not be satisfied until justice rolls down like water and righteousness like a mighty stream. I'm not unmindful that some of you here today have come from great trials and tribulations. Some of you have come from narrow jail cells. Some of you have come from areas where your quest for freedom has left you staggered by the winds of persecution and battered by the storms of police brutality. You have been the veterans of creative suffering. Continue to work with the faith that unearned suffering is redemptive. Go back to Mississippi. Go back to Alabama. Go back to South Carolina. Go back to Georgia. Go back to Louisiana. Go back to the slums and the ghettos of our northern cities, knowing that this situation can and will be changed. Let us not wallow in the valley of despair. I say to you today, my friends, that even though we must face the difficulties of today and tomorrow, I still have a dream. And it's a dream deeply rooted in the American dream. I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal. I have a dream that one day on the red hills of Georgia, sons of former slaves and sons of former slave owners will be able to sit down together at the table of brotherhood. I have a dream today. I have a dream that even the state of Mississippi, a state sweltering with oppression and sweltering with the heat of injustice, will one day be transformed into an oasis of freedom and justice. I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the contents of their character. I have a dream today. I have a dream that even in Alabama, with this vicious racist, with this governor having his lips dripping the words of interposition and nullification, one day, down in Alabama, little black boys and little white, black girls will be able to join hands with little white boys and white girls as brothers and sisters. I have a dream today. I have a dream that one day every valley shall be exalted and every mountain shall be made low. The rough places made plain and the crooked places made straight, and the glory of the Lord shall be revealed, and all flesh shall see it together. This is our hope. This is the faith that I go back to the South with. With this faith, we'll be able to hew out of the mountain of despair a stone of hope. With this faith, we'll be able to transform the jangling discords of our nation into a beautiful symphony of brotherhood. With this faith, we'll be able to work together, to pray together, to struggle together, go to jail together, stand up for freedom together, knowing that we will be free one day. This will be the day when all of God's children will be able to sing with new meaning. My country, 'tis of thee. Sweet land of liberty, of thee I sing. Land of my fathers died, land of the pilgrims' pride. From every mountainside, let freedom ring. And if America is to become a great nation, this must become true. So let freedom ring from the prodigious hilltops of New Hampshire. Let freedom ring from the mighty mountains of New York. Let freedom ring from the heightening Alleghenies of Pennsylvania. Let freedom ring from the snow-capped Rockies of Colorado. Let freedom ring from the curvaceous slopes of California. But not only that, let freedom ring from Stone Mountain of Georgia. Let freedom ring from Lookout Mountain of Tennessee. Let freedom ring from every mountain and molehill of Mississippi. From every mountainside, let freedom ring. And when this happens, and when we allow freedom to ring from every village and every hamlet, from every state and city, we'll be able to speed up that day when all of God's children, black men and white men, Jews and Gentiles, Protestants and Catholics, will be able to join hands in singing that old Negro spiritual. Free at last, free at last. Thank God Almighty, we're free at last. God bless you. That one little bump in the middle.